Thank you very much, ladies, for that lovely introduction. It's such a pleasure to have been invited to be here at this amazing event today. I'm really sorry not to be able to be here for the entire event. Unfortunately, I have an unwell child at home of my own that I will need to get back to after this session. But, I've got big shoes to try and follow in. The talks that we've had today have been incredible. The courage and the thoughtfulness that the children have demonstrated that have spoken in the session that I've been here for has just been astounding. So, yeah, can we give them another clap? Like that's... I've been to lots of conferences. I've never been to a conference where children and young people get up and speak like this. Oh, actually, that's not entirely true, but not like this. And it's just so powerful and amazing, and I think we should have more of this. Anyway, I have a job to do. I have a timer to set myself because I've got 30 minutes, and if talking were an Olympic event, I could probably gold medal for Australia. So I'm going to set myself a timer and keep an eye on that. Right. Okay, so I did just want to acknowledge on behalf of myself and the rest of the group, again, pay respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and acknowledge the amazing custodianship over tens of thousands of years of this beautiful country that we're lucky enough to call home. In terms of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to give a bit of an overview about why what we refer to as clinically significant anxiety is important. And when we talk about clinically significant anxiety, really what we're talking about is anxiety that has sort of got to a point for a person, whether they're a child, a young person or an adult, where it's really causing significant distress and interference in terms of what they would like to be able to do and what they should be able to do at their age and stage. I'll also be talking a little bit about some, I guess, important information to know about anxiety. I'll be talking pretty briefly about the research in terms of what we know about evidence-based treatments for anxiety, and I'll spend most of my time talking about the ways in which the grown-ups around kids and young people can help children with their anxiety. So first of all, if we talk about why clinically significant anxiety in kids is significant, and I don't like the fact that I've put the word significant twice in my title, but anyway, I guess just some points to note. If we ask kids and young people what the most common psychological complaint is in that age group, then they unanimously tell us that it's anxiety problems. If we were to ask adults about the same question, they would generally tell us that it's behavioural and attentional difficulties. So different answers depending on who we're talking to, which is actually important to keep in mind. We also know that anxiety has a really negative impact, as we've heard from when in the kids' talks, on things like peer relationships, family relationships, academic performance, all sorts of different things. It also negatively impacts physical health as well, so that relationship between mind and body, which is always kind of there. We know that clinically significant anxiety, so where it's gotten to a point where it's really causing consistently high levels of distress and interference, doesn't tend to get better without treatment. Rather, it just persists and indeed acts as what we refer to as a gateway for other mental health conditions such as depression and substance use. And again, we heard mention of these conditions earlier. We also know that clinically significant anxiety in kids is often not treated at all. Of those, and this gets back to the issue that was talked about in terms of access to services. And if it is treated, then the percentage of children and young people who get an evidence-based treatment is tiny, really tiny. So that's concerning. That should concern us as adults. This is a we're talking about something that has a significant impact on entire families, not just individual children. And of course, this is true for anything that happens to a child or a young person. It doesn't just impact them, it impacts their entire family system. So we do need to be thinking, I think, far more about entire families as opposed to sort of this idea of an identified client that the problem rests with. That's not, from my perspective, the way it works. It's always about families and working with families. Okay, so some useful, hopefully, useful information about anxiety. Sorry, the reason I'm turning around is I can't see what that slide is too far away for me to be able to read that little writing. So we generally tend to see anxiety as a multi-dimensional response. What I mean by that is it's got different parts to it. So we think of it as having 3 different parts to it. There's the cognitive or mental part to it. So this is really what we're telling ourselves in our heads, what we're thinking. There's the physiological or physical system or part to anxiety. So this is what's happening in our bodies when we get anxious. And then there's the behavioural part to anxiety. This is what we actually do in situations where we feel anxious. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But it's very much, with anxiety, we think of it as being this response to the expectation of threat. Now, that's important because that's linked to the fact that anxiety actually has an important and useful job to do. Anxiety is an emotion that we experience when we think we're going to be under threat. The feeling of anxiety is the reason that people look before they cross the road, because they have this idea in their head of potential threat in the form of an oncoming car. If we didn't have that idea, far more people would step onto the road without looking and would be hit by the cars that are coming. So anxiety has a really important job to do in terms, from an evolutionary perspective, in terms of helping to keep us safe from potential threats. The problem comes when our anxiety system, if you like, is activated far too early by threats that it doesn't need to be activated by, which is the scenario that we often find kids facing. So it's a little bit like a fire alarm that's going off to a piece of toast that's burning in the toaster, as opposed to a real fire in the house. So anxiety is common, it's typically short-lived, and it's entirely normal. Everybody experiences anxiety. If there was anybody in this room who would say to me, I've never had the experience of anxiety, I'd actually be quite concerned about that person. It's a normal and useful human emotion. Where it becomes problematic is where it's really starting to cause consistently high levels of distress and stop people from doing the things that they want or need to be able to do. And finally, and kind of related to that, even if it were possible, which it's not, we wouldn't want to eliminate anxiety altogether for the reasons that I've talked about. Our goal as mental health professionals is always to help people, regardless of where they are on the lifespan in terms of age, to manage anxiety more effectively. That's our goal, rather than trying to eliminate it, which is impossible. Okay, so how does anxiety work? If we think about what I was talking about in terms of those 3 interrelated systems, hopefully I'm holding up 3 fingers, yes, the mental or cognitive system, the behavioural system, what we actually do, the physical system. I just wanted to use an example to demonstrate, hopefully, how these 3 systems come together to produce that subjective feeling of anxiety. So imagine that we've got Sam, and let's say that Sam has been invited to a party, a friend's party, and his parents take Sam to the house where the party is being held, and Sam says, can you guys just wait until I go into the house, just to make sure that everything's okay, and I'll give you a thumbs up, and then you can go and come back when it's time to pick me up. And the parents Okay, yep, that's fine. Sam crosses the road, walks over to the house where the party is being held. The front door's open. He looks in. He can see lots of kids laughing, standing around, talking. They're having a good time. But he can't see the friends that invited him to this party. And then he starts to think to himself, oh, I can't see Aaron. And actually, I don't know any of these other kids in this room. And if I don't know them, then they don't know me. And they're probably thinking, what's he doing here? He shouldn't be here. So what's happening at this point is that there are lots of negative, anxiety-provoking thoughts that Sam is experiencing. Now, the next thing that might happen for Sam is that he notices that his heart is starting to beat really, really fast. And he might also notice that his face feels hot, which tells him that he's probably gone a bit red in the cheeks. And so then there's this nasty little feedback loop between what's happening in his body, the physical system of anxiety, and his thoughts. So he's noticed what's happening in his body, and now he's thinking, oh no, this is terrible. You know, I must be bright red. Everybody's going to be able to see how nervous I am. I must look like an idiot. So you put those two things together, what's happening in his body, what's happening in his head in terms of what he's telling himself, his thoughts, and you end up with this really high subjective sense of anxiety, tension, uneasiness. Now, the next thing that is likely to happen, and by the way, all of this takes far less time to happen than it does for me to explain it to you, but the next thing that will often happen in this kind of scenario is that as Sam's anxiety is increasing and increasing, he makes the decision to leave. He turns around and walks away and walks back to his parents' car. Now, as he walks away, what's going to happen immediately is that his anxiety will actually come down, because that source of potential threat of being involved in the party, he's taking himself away from that threat. But the other thing that will happen is that in the long term, Sam's anxiety about these kind of situations is going to increase. And as he's walking towards the car, away from the party, he's probably saying something in his head to himself along the lines of, well, that was awful. That was every bit as bad as I thought it was going to be. I can't do these sort of situations. I'm terrible around other kids. I shouldn't have come. Okay, so every time you avoid something when you're anxious, it really kind of strengthens the anxiety. Anxiety and avoidance are like best friends, like this. So hopefully that kind of makes sense in terms of how those three different systems, what we think and tell ourselves in our minds, what happens in our bodies and how we behave, how they fit together to cause and maintain anxiety. Okay, so why do kids become anxious to a point where it's getting to that sort of clinical level? So there's generally no one pathway. Like, people have different pathways to get to that point. But some of the factors that we know are important are biological and genetic influences. So we know that anxiety is transmitted within families, and that some of that is just down to genetics, and something called temperamental qualities, which are the qualities that babies are born with, literally, when they come into the world. We also know that stressful, as has been talked about by the kids, stressful life events and trauma exposure can definitely be related to the development of clinically significant anxiety problems in kids and young people. But unless you have a time machine or some way of modifying your own genetics, you can't change that stuff. So where, as psychologists, we would tend to focus our attention is on something called the learning influences, which I'll talk about in a moment. I guess just to say the other things are useful, the other kind of factors in terms of like biology, genetics, stressful life events and trauma are useful and important in terms of understanding how somebody has gotten to the point that they're at. But generally speaking, there's not much we can do about that. Yeah, which is why we focus on what we can do something about, this idea of the learning influences. So learning influences, these are ways in which people around children and young people are having generally an unintentional or an accidental kind of impact on their children's anxiety. Now, these learning influences don't cause anxiety. They can be part of the picture of what keeps anxiety going, though, over time. So there's a list there of different types of learning influences. I'm just going to show you, hopefully, a video of one of them, which is the anxiety avoidance escalation trap that most parents... Don't know if we can turn that up a little bit.
Maybe it's not such a good idea.
What do you mean?
I just feel like it wouldn't be good. Like, I shouldn't go.
Why? It's going to be a sleepover with all your friends. Aren't you looking forward to it?
No, I don't think I should go. I think I should...
Are you worried about it?
I think I should just stay home.
Why?
I just can't.
But you're going to enjoy it. You're going to be with your friends.
No, just let me stay home.
I think that you would enjoy it if you went.
No, please let me stay home.
Well, what am I going to do? Ring Isabella's mum and say you can't come?
Yes.
All right, okay.
Thank you. I really understand.
So that's an example of the escalation anxiety avoidance trap, and most, if not all, parents of kids with clinically significant anxiety will find themselves in this situation pretty frequently, actually. And yeah, I'll talk in a moment about some of the things that we can do as grown-ups to sort of help kids around this kind of stuff. Okay, so I just want to briefly speak about something that is probably not very interesting, but it is actually kind of important. So what's the evidence in terms of what we know about treatment outcome research? So for a very long time, a particular therapeutic approach referred to as cognitive behavioural therapy that involved working individually with kids or in a group situation with a group of kids has been seen as the traditional gold standard treatment for anxiety disorders or clinically significant anxiety in kids and adolescents. Now, I guess just some stats about that. What we know is that actually less than 60% of kids who get with an anxiety disorder who get child-focused cognitive behavioural therapy will be free of their most pressing or intense or distressing anxiety diagnosis at the end of treatment. And of those responders, a large proportion, up to 50% across different studies, don't maintain the gains that they've made in therapy. To me, that makes sense because, you know, you're working with the individual child, but at the end of the day, as a mental health professional, you might spend an hour once a week with a child. You're not the person that they're spending most of their time with. And so I guess this field has really moved much more towards thinking about the idea of what could we do by working with parents and caregivers who are the people that kids and adolescents spend so much more time with than mental health professionals. And there's some really good evidence now, some from our group and some from America and the UK as well, about the benefits of parent or caregiver-focused interventions for addressing clinically significant anxiety. So I just want to talk about the program that we've developed just in the context of giving you some ideas about useful things that grown-ups can do. So I'm required to put up this conflict of interest disclosure statement because we developed this program, we were evaluating it at the university, etc., etc. And then once we realised that it was working very well, the university essentially commercialised it, and now they disseminate it across the world, which is amazing because it means that people are getting a program that might otherwise have just sat within a university project scenario, which is never good. But so I am required to put that up. Okay. So what is Fearless Triple P? Well, if any of you know the Triple P program, everybody I've ever spoken to has said that this program, Fearless, is the most un-Triple P-like thing they've ever seen. For a start, most Triple P programs focus very much on behavioural issues, and this is all about, Fearless is all about anxiety. And it's not about, by the way, being fearless, because we need to have some fear in life. It's about fearing less. So it's a parenting or caregiving intervention, and it's designed to help parents to take on their role as the most important person in their children's lives. It's been designed to be as flexible and accessible as possible, and it's got a few different sort of versions, if you like. So there's a 2-hour seminar that is designed for any parent, even if their child is not demonstrating clinically significant anxiety. And then at the clinical level, we have a number of different versions that have been developed to try and really address issues around accessibility. So there is a 6-week program that can be delivered individually or to groups of parents. There is a 1-day workshop version of the program, and there is also now an online version of the program, and that's the federal government has made that free for all Australian parents. And you can just Google Fearless Triple P, or I think that link should work as well. But if you're interested, please do check that out. So this is just a bit of an overview of what's in the program, and I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of these things. So you'll see that first session, which is just kind of education about anxiety and how it develops, that's kind of the sort of content that I've already covered in terms today, in terms of talking about some hopefully useful information to know about anxiety. The second session is all about promoting emotional resilience. The third session is about modelling and the way that we think and how to think in a more flexible, realistic way. The fourth session is about facing up to feared situations. The fifth session is all about how, as grown-ups, we respond to children's anxiety and whether the way we're responding is helping or perhaps actually accidentally prolonging the anxiety. And the last session is about constructive problem solving. The other thing I'd say before I sort of go on to sort of looking at the idea of emotional resilience is that we really, when parents show up for our programs, we really kind of make we try and make a strong case for, okay, we understand that you're here because you're generally worried about one of your kids in particular, but we really, really encourage you to take whatever you learn from this program and apply it to your whole family. Think about, doing this stuff with all of your kids. Think about applying the principles of anxiety management that we're going to be learning about together to yourselves. Because if you think about your children, nobody is going to sit them down and teach them how to manage anxiety effectively. You, as parents and caregivers, are the very best people to do that job. And parents will say to us, but am I? I don't have any qualification to do that. Surely it should be a mental health professional. And we'll be like, no, it should be you guys. You just need to know what the content is. And then you are the best people because you know your children. You know how to explain things in ways that they're going to understand. You are the best people to do this work. Okay, so in the realm of that second session content about promoting emotional resilience, we talk a lot about expressing feelings appropriately and sort of give parents and caregivers just, you know, these really kind of seem very simple and basic tips about helping kids to talk about their feelings. So asking how kids feel, stopping what you're doing and actually listening and showing that you're paying attention and taking it seriously. Summarising what you've understood your child to have said to you to make sure that you've got it right, and that also communicates that you've been listening. And then finally, if it's appropriate, to sort of provide some validation, something like, you know what, I think if I was in that situation, I might feel exactly the same way that you're describing feeling. Very powerful. Hopefully we're now about to see a video example of a mum doing a really nice job of just listening, because very often the temptation for us as parents and caregivers, and this goes back to a point that Hayano was making earlier, I think in his talk, is we want to, because, and it's coming from such a good place, we want to protect our kids, we want for everything to be okay for them, we want to make it better. And sometimes what that means is we jump in and try and solve things for them. But the mum that we're about to see in this video is actually doing a really nice job of just listening. But you can, I mean, I always look at this video and I can sort of see several points where, as a parent, I might be tempted to kind of jump in and perhaps suggest something or whatever. But, you know, this mum's doing a really nice job. And great use of dog as, you know, a way to facilitate the conversation too.
Hey, darling. You don't seem your usual happy self today. Seem a bit quieter than usual.
We can help our children learn to express their feelings appropriately by checking in with them when we notice that they are acting differently or seem down or preoccupied. It's important to let them know they're not alone when they have uncomfortable feelings. We can help them learn to express their feelings appropriately so as not to be hurtful to others. When they start to open up, stop what you're doing and give them your full attention.
I went to Claire's yesterday, and you know how I went to that birthday party? Yeah, she had all of her new friends there, and I just kind of felt left out because she didn't really want to talk to me or anything.
Summarise what your child shares with you. This lets them know that you are listening carefully, and it also allows you to check that you have understood accurately.
Well, that's tough, sweetie. Well, it sounds like you were feeling really excluded.
Yeah.
Where it's appropriate, validate your child's feelings.
Well, I'd imagine if I was in that situation, I'd feel really sad too.
It's often really difficult to see a child upset and unhappy, and the impulse is to find solutions to make them feel better, to fix the situation for them. But it's often better to keep listening rather than to talk. Here, the mother's holding back, not jumping in and telling her daughter what to do or how to feel. She's doing a great job of accepting her daughter's feelings as valid and important. The mother's approach to this conversation will help her daughter learn to manage her own emotions rather than having mum do it for her.
Is she changing? And does she not want to be my friend anymore? I don't know.
They're hard thoughts to have, hey?
It's important to acknowledge what you've been told and affirm the child's feelings when it's appropriate.
Because you've had such a long friendship with her, it must feel really hard to not feel so close right now.
Yeah.
Praise your child for recognising and talking about their feelings. You want them to be open like this and express their feelings appropriately.
Thank you for being brave to talk about that with me. You know that you can always talk things through with me whenever you need to. Yeah.
The mother acknowledges and rewards her daughter for appropriately expressing her feelings by actually thanking her for being brave enough to talk about those feelings. I always forget that that I pop into that video. This is from the online version, and I can tell you, I never looked that put together in real life. Took several people to make that happen. Okay, so one of the other things that we talk about in that second session about promoting emotional resilience is some effective ways of coping. See, the thing is that it doesn't matter whether we're 7 or 42 or any age in between or above 42. They're just random numbers that came into my head. When we're really anxious, it becomes very hard to think clearly or sensibly. Essentially, that part of our brain goes offline and stops working. This is very basic and simplistic way of explaining it, but it's very hard to think sensibly when our emotions are at a very high level of intensity. And so the reason that this idea of coping cards can be good is that it's just a simple, concrete, tangible thing that we can look at and remind ourselves of something that we know is true when we can't actually have that thought process in that moment. And so for kids, they could literally be bits of card that are perhaps decorated, or whatever. So, this is an activity that you can actually have some fun with your kids around in terms of making some coping cards. I personally have coping cards stuck in all the different workplaces that I work in. They're generally along the lines of, you feel overwhelmed right now, but you felt overwhelmed before. It generally is okay. This feeling will pass. Something along those lines. Coping cards are a good idea. For adolescents, they could be, something on the Notes app of their phone, for instance. But they're just a nice reminder when we can't think of something reassuring to say to ourselves in that moment. Controlled breathing. Now, I just want to emphasise this is not the same as diaphragmatic breathing or anything like that. This is really a very simple circuit breaker kind of activity, and the way it works, it's pretty simple, and it's designed to be simple so that nobody gets it. Nobody can be unsuccessful at it, is the idea. So you just breathe in through your nose, hold that for 5 seconds, and then out through your mouth, and you do that 3 times. And it's literally a circuit breaker in terms of all the physiological stuff that's happening in our body when we're anxious. It just buys us a minute to think and let those feelings kind of settle and perhaps reduce a little bit. Because when our emotions are kind of at 9 or 10 out of 10 in terms of intensity, we really can't engage. Again, it doesn't matter whether a child or an adult. We really can't engage in any sort of problem solving or flexible thinking or anything like that. The priority has to be getting that emotional intensity down to a point where we can help our kids engage in those other strategies. Okay, so flexible and realistic thinking. So this comes into session 3. Now, I just want to introduce this idea of the ABC model. Some people may have heard of this. A stands for activating event. This is a thing or experience that actually happens to us. B stands for our beliefs or thoughts about that event, our way of making sense of it. And C stands for consequences. And these might be emotional, how we feel. They might be physical in terms of stuff that's happening in our body. They might be behavioural in terms of what we actually do. This is an example to show you how the ABC model works. So imagine that your partner is late home from work, that you haven't heard from them, and that it's unusual for them to be late and for them to have not been in contact. So that's the activating event. That's the thing that has actually happened. Now, you might be amused when you see the different alternatives that come up in the ways of making sense of this, but it really doesn't matter who I'm talking to, like what group of people I'm talking to, whether it's first year undergraduate uni students, whether it's a group of parents and caregivers, whether it's a group such as yourselves, fellow mental health professionals, it makes no difference. I get the same 3 alternatives coming up. So they've had an accident, and in fact they're probably dead. So our minds tend to go to negative, catastrophising interpretations in the first instance. Now, if you genuinely believe that that is the reason that your partner's late, then some of the consequences that you're going to be having, you're going to be feeling worried and panicky. You might, in terms of physical sensations, feel sick in the stomach. And have a racing heart. And in terms of what you actually do or how you behave, you might call for help. You might start ringing around the hospitals. So that's one way of making sense of this activating event or experience. Here's another way of making sense of it. They're having an affair. Okay. Now, if you genuinely believe that that is the reason that your partner is late home, what are your consequences going to be or might be? So in terms of emotions, you might be angry and upset. In terms of physical sensations, your muscles might become really tense. In terms of behavioural actions, you might pack up their things. I've had people tell me very eerily specific ideas about what the behavioural reaction might be, like I'd cut off all the sleeves of their jackets. I'm like, okay, feels like you've thought about this. Anyway, and then the third alternative that people generally come up with when I say to them, okay, let's come up with as many different ways as we can of making sense of this one activating event, is that they're working late or they're running late or something innocuous that's not threatening. And if you genuinely believe that, then in terms of how you're feeling, you might feel sympathetic. You might also feel a bit annoyed, to be quite honest. In terms of what's happening in your body, probably not too much. And in terms of what you're actually going to do, you might put their dinner aside, although I have had other people tell me that they'd just put their dinner in the bin because really, you know, the partner should have found some way to let them know that they're running late. So the point here is that it's really not so much about what happens to us, it's about how we make sense of what happens to us that determines how we feel about what happens to us and what we're going to do about it. So that brings us to the idea of flexible and realistic thinking, which we really is something that we really kind of go hard on in the Fearless program. And this is something that as grown-ups around kids, we can really try and encourage our kids to be able to do, to understand that thoughts are not facts. They're not the same. Thoughts are one thing, facts are a different thing. Sometimes they're the same, but often they're not. Often our thoughts are just guesses, and often those guesses are incredibly poorly informed, actually. Being able to think about a situation in a variety of ways, so understanding that there is always multiple ways of thinking about any given situation. We encourage kids to practice mental gym, and that can be, you're sitting at the family dinner table perhaps, or somewhere else where you're together, and you're just encouraging all of your kids to come up with as many different ways as they can of making sense of a given situation. It doesn't have to, and it's important to say, look, this doesn't have to be what you would actually think. We're just practicing being mentally flexible. We're just practicing coming up with as many different ways of thinking about the same situation as we can. And if you are able to be mentally flexible, then that has a massive positive impact on how we respond in difficult or uncomfortable situations, because we're able to bring that flexibility to the situation, and rather than assuming the worst, like, the partner's had a car accident and they're dead, we're able to kind of go, well, there's other possible explanations for this. Avoidance and exposure. So how avoidance feeds anxiety. As I talked about when I went through that model and Sam's social situation, in the short term, avoidance actually reduces anxiety, which is why people keep doing it. But in the long term, it's not a helpful solution, and people miss out on the opportunity to realise that they can cope both with the situation and with the experience of that emotion of anxiety. And so every time people avoid something that makes them anxious, it really does strengthen anxiety. Exposure is a psychological principle. The fear ladder is the tool that we use to put that principle into practice in terms of overcoming avoidance. And it involves deliberately and repeatedly putting yourself in situations that are actually anxiety provoking. Now that might sound like a really crazy idea, but the idea is that we're doing it in a graduated way so that we're taking it step by step. Let me show you an example. So there's an example fear ladder. Now this is for a child who finds it hard to sleep in their own room at night time, and that could be for lots of reasons: fear of the dark, fear of being away from the parents, maybe something bad has happened to that child and they don't want to be alone in their own bedroom. And the idea is that we're breaking what feels like a really big, overwhelming task down into small, manageable steps, and we're gradually working our way up that ladder to get from where we currently are in terms of what this child can do to what they want to be able to do. Okay, so that's a fear ladder. And we also always link it to a reward menu with parents and caregivers' permission, and that's just an example of a reward menu, because we literally, with a fear ladder, are asking kids to do the things that they are finding really difficult. Okay, strategies for responding to children's anxiety. I'm just going to show you that list. If anybody is interested, you can look online or feel free to take a photo of the slide. Not going to go into that because I am totally out of time. Constructive problem solving. Again, feel free to take a photo of the slide or have a look at this. There's a whole session on it in the online program. But it's, again, this principle of taking what feels like an overwhelming problem and breaking it down into smaller steps and thinking about all the possible solutions and evaluating what might happen if you implement each solution. That's some evidence which I'll skip over, and that's the end. Thank you. So, yes, sorry for going over, guys. Like I said, if it was an Olympic event, I could gold medal. It's a pleasure.